How has modern technology impacted the African church? How is tech redefining the Christian culture? How can you use your story of pain and despair to impact the lives of the people around you? Stay tuned as we discover these topics and dive into them through the story of our next African champion. This is Molo Molo African Tech Stories. Welcome to Molo Molo African Tech Stories. I am really excited to have you on the show. I know, like I was saying before we started recording, that the last time we saw each other was when you were here in Munich, right? And
That's right. That was
yeah,
July
July,
last year.
July last year. And we had a really good heart to heart, and I'm
Oh
so
yeah,
grateful for you to come as my first guest. You are my first guest. Um,
that's such an
and
honor.
I consider you a biblical tech hero, a champion who's trying to make sure you leverage tech for God's work, and I really am excited to chat with you today.
Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
so I would like to just start with just by letting you introduce yourself, kind of who you are, so that at least people can get to know who you are at first.
Oh, thank you so much. So, of course, you and I we have something in common. I was born in Cameroon. Cameroon is like the reverse of Canada. Majority French, minority English. Canada is the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in English-speaking Cameroon. Grew up ended up spending a year in the university in Yaoundé before getting a scholarship to study in Germany, where you are right now. I wasn't in Munich, I was in
Mm-hmm.
Berlin for engineering studies. And then, yeah, so then life turned around. A couple of things happened that really got me into spiritual life. I took spiritual life very seriously while I was in Germany. And that took me on a completely new path in life that has taken me living in Cote d'Ivoire. They just won the African Nations
Yeah,
Cup, right?
exactly.
Uh, that's right. I spent 10 good years of my life in Cote d'Ivoire doing missionary work, humanitarian work. Was back in Cameroon for a couple of years, twice, and then been living in Nigeria, working here, and pursuing my life's calling from here since 2010.
Wow, wow.
So that's like a
I
big
know,
summary
I know.
of
Don't worry,
my
we'll get
life.
into the detail. Don't worry, it's fine. It's okay. I mean, but thanks for the summary. If you were to think of kind of the achievements over the years, what are some of the achievements that you are the most proud of? What would you say?
Wow, what a question. Um, well, I would say getting a government scholarship to go study in Germany was life
Mm-hmm.
changing. It introduced me to a completely new culture, new language, a new continent. So adapting to life in Germany was quite an achievement. Um, and then I would say surviving cancer. That was the major event that really turned my life around while I was a student in TU Berlin. In Berlin, I was diagnosed with cancer, and so cancer in my bone marrow, my kidney, my liver. So that was 31 years ago. I can't believe it.
Wow.
Actually, 32 now. And so surviving that was a great achievement. And then I think doing missionary work, and at some point feeling the call to go back to
Mm-hmm.
school. I resigned from missionary work in quote unquote doing it on a full time basis. Went back to school, earned a degree, and got a job in the tech space, IT and telecom industry. That was a major shift. So and that coincided with me moving to
Mm-hmm.
Lagos and learning to live in a city of I think probably 25 million people now.
Wow. Wow, that's really interesting, just how your life and of course God being in the forefront brought you in different places, right? And it's an amazing story to be thinking about it. Now, if I were to connect a little bit of kind of the achievement of you being a cancer survivor and your childhood, how would you would did you see it
Hmm.
coming, cancer, in terms of your parents or your aunties? Is it something that you could relate to and associate, or not?
Good question. Not really, because while going through the treatment, I had enough time to reflect on what are the possible causes. They normally were like three to four
Mm-hmm.
hypotheses. You could be working in a very toxic chemical environment. That's a possibility. It could be being under prolonged stress for a long period
Mm-hmm.
of time. It could be hereditary. So that's what you were alluding to. And it could also be viral, you know. So I did examine all those options, and the hereditary was not one of them.
Okay.
Um, that was surely not one of them. But it's interesting when you mention linking to childhood. What I linked to childhood in terms of my surviving aspect of cancer was that I grew up in the northwestern part of Cameroon, which is not very different from where you come from. The landscape is hilly, mountains. I remember at the age of 9 or 10, accompanying my grandmother to the farm um, to go plant corn,
Yeah.
groundnuts, cassava, name it. And then during harvest season, I had my basket. So I had a smaller size. The adults had a bigger size. I had a smaller
Mm-hmm.
size. So I carry corn
Wow.
and I cross the rivers and I climb the hills and I go down the valleys. When I went through cancer, I realized that was God preparing me to climb the highest figurative mountain of my life, which was
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
I learned endurance as a young, as a
Yeah.
preteen.
But
Yeah.
and now, just before I go into kind of the figurative meaning of the hills in our lives, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. Where in Cameroon? I don't think I know exactly where in West Cameroon was this.
So this is
Mm-hmm.
northwest. So Bamenda being the
Bamenda.
capital,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and yeah, my village is 1 hour away from Bamenda. So you get to
Mm-hmm.
Bamenda, and then another 1 hour of
Okay.
driving to get to. It's called Ginicom.
Ginicom.
Ginicom, quite known for. They have a very good missionary
Oh wow.
hospital,
Okay.
and known for very good schools
Okay.
also.
And is that where you went to school also when you were younger?
Yeah, that's where I was born, and I spent my first 6 years of primary school
Okay.
there.
Wow. Amazing. And
Yeah,
of course, I'm assuming then after that you moved to a bigger town.
I moved to Limbe. Back then, it was called Victoria,
Ah, okay.
coastal southwestern
Okay.
province.
Wow.
Yeah, it was called Victoria
Amazing.
and was renamed
Yeah.
Limbe.
I didn't know, actually I didn't know that Limbe was his the first name was Victoria. I didn't know that. Yeah, I so
That's right.
so you're right. I mean, we are from the same region, I my parents, my father, he's he actually was not born in Banjul. He was born slightly outside, but my grandfather migrated to Banjul, and I think with him being the son of one of the wives of the king at the time, if I'm not mistaken. And so i.e. that made, so there was always this thing when I grew up, my father was saying, tu es un prince, you're a prince, behave like one. um
Yeah,
you are a prince of Banjul, he used to always say. And but I have slightly different memories. I have memories of me being a child born in Europe and then moving to Cameroon around 7 8, and being traumatized by going to the village.
that's quite
Being
different.
traumatized, he's this young European kid who's thinking, what, where, cosa posso mangiare, which means, what can I eat? I'm asking my mom, what can I eat? Everything is dirty, and um, and I remember, I have a very vivid memory of being chased around by a mother hen, because I was playing with the chicks. I have a
Oh,
vivid memory of me
that's
running
right.
and screaming, and and those village ones. They're not fearful. They don't have fear
No, at
at
all.
all. They will
Yeah,
come
that's
for
true.
you and say, "Hey, my friend, leave
They'll
my
come after
things."
you. Yeah, that's right. That's very
So
true.
I do remember
Oh
that,
boy.
and but it's so and but yet, funny enough, I can always make good connections as well, mainly when it comes to resilience, right? And I think that's what I want to connect back
Mm.
to the figurative heals that you were speaking about. How do you feel also that your neighbors, or at least the people around you, also helped you to figure out what it means to climb those hills?
Oh, big time, big time. I think I've been very lucky. I'll call it God's
Mm-hmm.
favor, in that people have had a lot of impact till date in my development. In school, I was blessed with some incredible neighbors and
Mm-hmm.
classmates. In fact, I was in Cameroon just 2 months ago over the Christmas holiday to visit my mom and spend some time with family. And I reconnected with some of those people that I grew
Mm.
up with who really believed in me, inspired me, spurred me on, whether be it with academics, especially with academics. I was well surrounded. So um, there was a time when my dad and my mom were not living in the same city because of job challenges. My dad was in Limbe, my mom was in Tico, working for two different corporations, Sonora, CDC. Um, and so, because we had two homes, I was living with my dad in
Mm-hmm.
Limbe, and my mom was in Tico. But the neighborhood, the compound where we were living, the landlord lived right there, and there were some other tenants, and they literally became our
Wow.
parents. The mom who was like the landlady became like our
Mm.
mom. She would watch over us. She would make sure we don't go off track. She would check on us. You don't come home late, or where were you? And
Yeah.
you know so I really feel like God's providence ensured that the people He placed in my life kept me on
Mm-hmm.
track, and back to the topic of resilience, encouraged me not to give up, encouraged me to push
Yeah.
through, and I mentioned it especially in the era of
Yeah.
academics.
Wow. And what pushed you, or what made you feel that you needed to move abroad, to feel that you would then expand your academic resume? What do you remember what it was?
I do remember clearly. So back then in Cameroon, there was no English speaking
Oh wow.
university.
Okay.
So I grew up in English speaking Cameroon, had A levels, and back then the only option the only, well, I would say the only two options was either you go to the Central University in Yaoundé, which is like 100%
Mm-hmm.
French speaking, or you go abroad. Abroad could be next door in
Yes.
Nigeria, where I
Yes.
am now. So lots of English speaking Cameroonians actually went to university in
Ah,
Nigeria.
okay.
If you can afford to go to England, we used to call it
Yes.
Britain, United
Yes.
Kingdom. Um, if you can afford that, Britain, it was mainly Britain or
Okay.
Nigeria. That was kind of like the two major
Mm-hmm.
options for English speaking Cameroonians. And because I wasn't granted a scholarship, even though I
Mm-hmm.
deserved it, I was among the first five at the A levels, but my name didn't figure on a list of about
Oh,
100
wow.
people. Uh, so I had no choice but to go to university in Yaoundé, which felt at the time like a curse. Um, I didn't like French, and I didn't like the French
Yes.
system. Um, Mathematics felt like
Oh,
literature.
wow. Okay.
I grew up knowing that mathematics is applied
Yes.
physics. You solve a
Correct.
problem. You're given a problem to solve, and then you apply the laws of physics and further mathematics to resolve
Yeah.
it. That's what I knew as
Yeah.
maths. But I'm in a class and I'm told about syllogism. Consider that the A is this and B is this. Well, what I was like, this is not mathematics. Anyway, long story short, it was a tough
Yeah.
situation. In hindsight today, being very fluent in French, I think that was God's
Mm-hmm.
providence to get me to develop proficiency in
Mm.
French and to be a well-rounded
Yeah,
Cameroonian.
that's right.
So
Bilingual. You know, they
uh,
say a real
so
Cameroonian is a bilingual Cameroonian.
there you go. There you go. So in hindsight, I can smile
Yeah.
about it, but it was very uncomfortable. So being in Yaoundé for that 1 year, I all I wanted to do is leave the
Wow.
place and go abroad.
So you were basically during that time in Yaoundé, and then fundamentally how did so within that year you said, hey man, I need to go, I need to get going, right?
Yeah, so a bit more detail about that. So I went to
Hmm.
class. I remember going to class for the first 3 months religiously, really determined
Yeah.
to make it, in spite of the language barrier and all kinds of
Hmm.
challenges. Um, but it became really daunting because it's like I was studying. I was in they call it
Yes.
PC, physics chemistry
Hmm.
department. So in French, PC. They used to call it PC for short. So I'm in the physics chemistry department, and I just realized that almost after every lesson, I need to chase a classmate to ask for their notes because I'm not able to
Mm.
meet up because of the language challenge mainly. And then the curriculum is different. So, like I mentioned with mathematics. So, for 3 months, I was very religious. I still remember I had my notebooks, my ledgers, and I was very determined. But at some point, it became obvious to me that I might end up at the end of the year failing for the first time in my
Wow,
life.
that must have been scary.
It was very scary. I mean, failing had never been part of my
Yeah.
world. And so the prospect of ending the year with a fail, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So my fear was the scary part, like you said, was I was afraid that the system was going to break me and make me believe that I am not good in school, in
Yeah.
academics. That was my greatest fear.
Wow.
And so from that point on, I said, I'm not going to allow this to happen. So for the next months, I spent a year plus there. For the next 7, 8 months or something, I started schooling myself. I stopped going to official
Oh wow.
classes. And I started schooling myself in learning French, learning a lot of extracurricular
Yeah.
things. Uh, I used to listen to the news religiously to understand current events,
Okay.
politics, what's going
Yeah.
on around the world. Um, and then my full time job became looking for scholarships.
Ah, okay.
So I went around sniffing for scholarship. I heard about the Russian scholarship. I applied for the Russian scholarship. I heard about the Canadian scholarship. I applied for the Canadian
Wow.
scholarship. I went around sniffing. I went to the Ministry of Education, higher education. I was just sniffing around for any way to get a scholarship and leave.
Wow. And of course, then I guess and did you have many to choose, or did you feel like the first one was the one that you chose?
Yeah, interestingly, I was just shooting at everything that came my way. The Canadian was going to be my preferable
Hmm.
scholarship because number one, it had nothing to do with the government. It was private, and so you don't have any conditions of if you go study, you must come back to Cameroon or
Yes,
stuff
yes.
like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was well paid. Even as a
Okay.
student, you receive a lump sum of money
Hmm.
every month. Um, with incredible academic prospects. So I knew a few people who had had the scholarship the year before or 2 years before, and they had amazing living conditions. And they were in a bilingual country like
Oh,
Cameroon,
wow.
French and
Okay.
English. So there was a lot of advantages to that. And I was the most qualified to get that scholarship.
Wow. Amazing.
But amazingly, the list came out, and again, my name wasn't on the
Hmm.
list.
Surprising, huh?
Surprising.
You know,
Yeah.
in Cameroon, the Cameroon will say, mais mon frère, ça c'est la vérité, ça c'est la réalité.
C'est la vérité. C'est comme ça, hein, mon frère. On
On
prend ça
prend
comme
ça
ça.
comme ça. On gère, on gère.
Ouais. On gère, on gère. There you go. On
Wow. And
gère.
then of course,
C'est la vie,
so
hein.
I guess so the German scholarship came, and it was to, I guess, to go directly to Berlin, or where did you land up first?
So it was actually a government
Hmm.
scholarship to
Okay.
Germany. So it was awarded by the Cameroonian government to go study. So I landed in Köln. The flight landed. We first flew to
Hmm.
Paris, landed in
Wow.
Köln or Cologne in
Yeah.
French, and then took a bus from there straight down to Bodensee, Radolfzell, near
Okay.
Constance, at the border with
Wow.
Switzerland. So there I did first start with learning the German language for the first seven
Okay.
months. That was my full
Yes.
time
Yeah.
activity, learn the language.
Amazing.
And yeah,
Wow.
so that was my first pot of, of call. Um, from there, now came back to
Hmm.
Köln, where I landed to do a practicum, which is like the others call it
Yeah. Yeah.
IT, um, industrial training, and I did that with the Dutch
Okay.
Bundespost.
Okay.
Um,
How
yeah,
was learning
and
German?
before getting entrance to
Ah, yes, of
university.
course. Because I mean, as a foreigner, I think my mom did exactly that. She actually, both my parents, but my mom was more the one who has shared the story. So I don't know if you know, but my parents also, my mom got a scholarship to go to Italy to study, also through her grades and so forth. And she arrived. I don't know if it was Genova or I can't remember which town, and she did study basically Italian for, I don't know, 7, 8, I don't know how many months before they allowed her, or they allowed them to carry on with their
Yeah.
studies. My father was a renegade. He came via the back route to Italy. I
Okay.
remember. Well, he's very proud of that story actually. That he fought the Sahara Desert to get
Wow.
to Italy,
Okay.
and of course he sorted out his paperwork and managed to eventually also study, and both of them did graduate with a master's degree. But so I as you're speaking, different facets of your journey I associate in different ways. It's really amazing to
I
hear what
get that.
your
I
story.
get that.
Now, if I were to kind of bring the context of you in Germany as a young man, how it must have been really scary. How did you find out the news that you were now sick and potentially having cancer at the time? How did that come about?
Yeah, so this was arrived Germany in 1990, and the diagnosis came in February. So this month of
Hmm.
February, um,
Wow.
1992. That was 32 years ago,
Wow.
exactly in February. So how did I find out? Typically, as foreign students in Germany, I remember when I moved to
Hmm.
Berlin. So after the language course, I did the IT, and then I had to write what they call
Hmm.
PNDS, eine Prüfung zum Nachweis deutscher
Okay.
Kenntnis.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
exam
Yeah.
to prove
That you know
my
your language.
German
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
proficiency.
Genau. Hmm.
Exactly. So when I succeeded, that's how I got entrance to the Technical University in Berlin. So that's how I moved to Berlin. And my first semester was winter semester 91. At the end of the in December during Christmas, typical African students will find a way to
Hmm.
congregate, not to feel
Yes. Of
lonely
course.
and
Yes.
homesick. Because we celebrate the way we celebrate Christmas
Yes.
back in Africa is not
Yeah.
the way it
I know.
happens in
I
Europe.
know.
In Europe, people just disappear to their homes and the streets are
Yes.
empty. But in Africa, we're
That's right.
everywhere, we're visiting, we're knocking at people's doors,
Exactly.
so Christmas was often very challenging. My first Christmas was 1990. It was very lonely. So to prevent that from happening in 91, I remember traveling to Göttingen,
Okay.
Göttingen, which is a university city, some 3, 4 hours away from Berlin by train, and to visit other
Mhm.
Africans. And so we congregated from different cities in Germany, and we came together and we had a great time together.
Nice.
So my first signs of not feeling well was I remember us playing very competitive table tennis and also going on some bicycle rides. And I just realized that I wasn't at my normal
Hmm.
level physically. I was struggling. And so when I came back to Berlin, it was attributed to a cold. You know, when it's really cold, you can easily catch a cold and a
Yeah.
grippe.
Yeah.
You know, in the
Yeah.
U-Bahn. So my doctor thought it was just a cold, and I was being treated for a cold while preparing for my exams, which were coming up in a really short time. And I realized I couldn't sit and study for even up to an hour. Typically, I could study for many
Yeah.
hours in a
Yeah.
stretch, but I could barely sit for an hour. You know, 30 minutes into trying to study, I'm very uncomfortable. I'm having pain all around, and it was affecting my movement. So when it became really obvious was the day I couldn't walk.
Wow.
I could barely walk. Even to go back and see my doctor, who had been treating me for a virus or a cold, um, it took me forever to leave just my room to the bus stop, which was just really
Yeah.
close by. The bus stop was just like outside my Studentenwohnheim, my student
Yeah.
hostel. But just to leave my room and get to the bus stop, it took forever.
Hmm.
You know. So when I got to the doctor's, when I met the doctor, it was obvious. He was like, something is really wrong, and he referred me now to one of the university teaching hospitals, Klinikum Steglitz in
Okay.
Berlin.
Yeah.
And
That
then,
must have. I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
when I hear this, I can only picture, a young man away from family. You've been studying German for the past 7, 8, 9 months. Now you're at university, and a few months later, literally,
yeah,
you are now. helpless. You are now in the
Yeah.
hands of doctors, and your friends or people who are there, they can't help you. Um, they what? Oh, wow, I mean, beyond the obvious feelings of loneliness, what are some what are some thoughts that went through your head in terms of you thinking of home, or you thinking of your future, that came about when you were now going through doctors, that it was real, right? It's here, and it needs to be diagnosed, and I'm sure a series of doctor visits and back and forth, and school becoming less of a priority, even though it was your first priority before arriving. What are some thoughts that was going through your head during that time?
Wow, thank you. First of all, just want to thank you for painting that vivid picture with your words, because it made me quite
Mm,
emotional. I had to fight back tears because you found the right words to describe what it was like. And yeah, I was fighting for my life. So going to hospital, I was immediately taken into the emergency section of the hospital. Um, they were on me doing all kinds of medical tests. You know, the medical system in
yeah,
Germany, quite effective. And I never had to go. I never left hospital. That was February. I never left hospital till December that year.
amazing.
And the first 3 weeks was all kinds of medical exams. And when it hit me, so a couple of things happened that really drove the message home that I am in a life threatening condition.
Yeah,
The first was just the routine of the medical tests. The doctor will come, you know what they use to collect
yeah,
blood,
yeah,
right? They're like small
exactly.
capsules. The doctor will show up with like 20 of those. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. So he just take it, tack, the thing fills up. He drops it, takes the next one,
Oh my word.
and he will collect that much blood. There was a day I was like, are you going to finish my blood in my
Yeah,
system?
that's tough.
And he said, you don't have to worry, you have enough of it in your
It's
body.
like, my friend, that's the list of your troubles.
Man! So it hit me that something serious is going on
Yeah,
here. Apart from the lack of mobility and the fever and stuff like that, it hit me something was wrong. The next stage was 3 weeks into doing all kinds of medical tests and not finding whatever it was. I'd lost 10 kilograms in between. I was at 40 degrees of fever at night. When I get up in the morning, it felt like somebody came and poured water on my bed.
wow,
It was wet just from fever and sweating. And this is in winter.
wow,
And so 3 weeks into that, I'll never forget a morning when they came for their normal rounds. There were three patients in the room. I was very close to the door. So when they walk into the door, they go to the last patient at the extreme end of the room. When they're done, they come to the one in the
hmm,
middle. When they're done, they come to me. I'm closest to the door. But I'll never forget this picture of the college of doctors and senior nurses. There are like 8 of them,
yeah,
They come, when they get to me, the normal routine, they'll ask for temperature, blood pressure, blah, 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 and check all. But this time, because they had done that routine for 3 weeks and there was still no solution, they had no clue what I was suffering from, but I was
yeah,
dying. This time, when they got to my bed, they just stood there, stared at me. They couldn't pronounce a single word, and then they walked out of the room.
wow,
So they were stuck. They felt like they had tried everything possible. They didn't know what to do. So back to your question about what was going through my mind, I think at that point I realized, wow, something is. I mean, it became obvious that I was fighting for my life, and it became more vivid when they now finally did another test that revealed that it was cancer. It was a bone marrow puncture. Pulled out the bone marrow, tested it, found cancer cells inside the bone marrow, and then immediately started the treatment, chemotherapy, and had to lay what they call a
Yeah.
catheter, like an artificial
Yeah.
vein that will help to carry the volume of medication into the system. And the process of laying that catheter was so painful. I still have like a mark from it
Oh,
till
wow.
date. And it was so painful that when I complained to my doctor about how painful it is, he looked at me straight in the eyes. He said in German, Herr Kimeng, meaning Mr.
Yeah.
Gilbert, deine Krankheit ist sehr
Yeah.
gefährlich. Your illness is very
Yeah.
dangerous. And the next thing he said, you got to choose.
Ja, du musst
You got
entscheiden.
to choose
Ja.
between, yeah, du musst entscheiden, yeah. Choose between this pain or the other alternative, which he and I knew what he was
Yeah.
talking about. Choose between going through the pain or you die.
Wow. Typical German, right?
Ah, typical,
That's a,
man.
that's a
Typical.
typical German. Straight.
You know,
Yeah.
but
It,
you know what? Till date, I'm grateful we had that conversation
yeah.
because after that, I thought about it and I chose life. And they did even more complicated things to me. I was punctured on my spinal cord 16
Hmm.
times to prevent cancer from getting into my nervous
Oh, wow.
system. I had bone marrow punctures 12 times. I never complained. These were even more complicated stuff. But in my mind, I'm like, I want to leave.
Wow.
So that conversation was a turning point.
Now, if I were to kind of bring of course, now this is the physical aspect, right? There's a physical aspect in terms of pain. There's a psychological aspect in terms of just stress and the worries of, am I going to make it? Is it good enough? Are the doctors, do they know what they're doing? But there's also a spiritual aspect, right? In
Yeah.
terms of, you know, why is this happening to me, God? Why now? Why me? And so my question is actually, given all this technology that was around you, given all this tech, given, essentially you are becoming a specimen that people are now studying
Yeah.
and wanting to know what else is going
Literally.
on. What was your thoughts spiritually at that time regarding whether God was also present? Where was your mind in terms of those questions?
Yeah, for sure. I think that was the deepest part, beyond the physical, the psychological, far from home, lonely, dealing with this illness. I think the deepest part was, I mean, we all know back then things have changed
Yeah,
today. There's a lot more expectancy and survival rates when it comes to cancer. 30 years ago
exactly.
plus, cancer was a death sentence.
Yeah,
So here am I dealing with 80% probability plus that I'm going to die. And so the biggest question was, if I die, am I going to be with God? But before even that big question, there's all this, what you described. Why me? Um, I remember even, I don't know if it was in a prayer or just in my thoughts. I remember reading some scripture about Jeremiah was complaining to God. I think it's Lamentations. And I remember relating with the thought of, I never even asked God I never asked to exist.
Mm.
You decided to create me, and now here am I
Yeah.
going through this. It wasn't even my choice to
Yeah.
exist, you know? So those are some of the deep feelings and thoughts that were running through my mind. The world was pretty much in turmoil. It has not changed. Today we're talking about
Yeah.
Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, and so on. Back then it was Yugoslavia.
Exactly.
There was a war in Yugoslavia at the time. It was a famine in Ethiopia. There were earthquakes in
Oh wow.
Japan. I remember vividly. It felt like the world was coming to an end, and my personal world was
Wow.
crumbling. You know. So the big question was, where is God in all of this? My my theology was challenged. My little theology that I developed as a young Catholic, Christian believer was seriously challenged. Um, but it was a good thing to start reading the Psalms, start reading the book of Job, and and it started helping me to put some
Mm.
context that, hey, bad things can happen even to good people
Yeah.
like Job.
Yeah.
But so the Bible started kind of like help guide me through that whole turmoil of emotions and thoughts when I started reading the Bible and just I think I went on a search, not just with the Bible. I was like, could it be the Quran? Could it be
Yeah.
Buddhism? Could it be Confucius? I was on a search, on a wild
Wow.
search, you know.
And
Yeah.
how did you manage to end that search? How did that search end that you now knew, okay, this is this I can relate with this is the way I believe I can fight. I'm assuming you found, if I'm not mistaken, your story is you did
Yeah.
find that path while you were still struggling with cancer. How did you manage to get to that point?
Great question. I think in hindsight, I was seeking for God, and God put the right people. One of my doctors uh, was a Christian. I got to I got into a deep spiritual conversation with him. But I think prior even to meeting him, the simple habit of reading the
Okay.
Bible. There was a Cameroonian lady who was doing her doctorate in economics in Berlin at the time. She became like my
Oh
mother.
wow.
She became the reference person. When the doctors want to talk to my family, she comes and they
I
talk to
see.
him, to her, sorry. And so she got a Bible for me. She ordered an English Bible from
Oh
England,
wow.
a Good News Bible, yellow cover, yellow hardcover Bible. I don't know where I lost that Bible. I should have kept that Bible,
Yeah.
man. So it was incredible reading. And one of the defining things I read in the Bible, beyond the story of Job, the Psalms, there's a lot of hope that just started growing in my heart as I read different stories in the
Mm-hmm.
Bible and see how things really get bad before they
Yeah.
get better. And Job's story is a perfect example
Yeah.
of that. But there's a verse that kind of like really gave me a lot of hope. Romans 8:28 became my favorite scripture till today. God works in all, in
Exactly.
everything, for the good of those who love
Amen.
Him.
Exactly.
So for me, that scripture meant if I do my part, which is love God, then He will find a way to make sense out of this complete confusion I'm
Yeah.
in. He will He will bring something good out of
Wow.
this, you know. And so I held on to that. And the story of Job, the way it ended, after he lost
Mm-hmm.
everything, and God restored it double for his
Yeah.
trouble. When I read that story, the equation in my mind was, has God changed? The answer was
Mm.
no. So why can't what God did to Job, why can't that be my story? So I held on to those two core convictions that God can turn this around, and He did it for Job, He can do it for me. And my part will be I'll hold onto God like somebody who is drowning in the
Yeah,
ocean and finds a
that's
piece of
nice. You
wood or
just hold
whatever
on.
and just clings onto it. I will cling onto this until with all of my might. So that was the state of mind.
Wow. I mean, I am also getting emotional as you're talking, Gilbert. Thank you so much for making this episode such a moving one for me. Wow. So if I were to kind of reflect a little bit now, would you say the experience that you've had and the triumph, of course, by the way, before I go to kind of the triumph, how did you actually get to know that you were all clear? What was how did that go about? Was it a specific process, or did you just gradually got better? How did that happen?
Yeah, there was a clear process. So the process was, um, so the treatment was supposed to last for about six
Mm-hmm.
months, but it got extended because there was a likelihood that if they ended the normal treatment that they set out to do, there was a likelihood that the cancer would come back. So they suggested or recommended that I do a bone marrow transplant, which they did. Very
Mm-hmm.
complicated. I became a guinea pig for
Wow.
real. I had to sign papers because they were trying stem cell technology on me. I was one of the first
Amazing.
few that they tried that on. And so today is an established method of treatment, but I was among the early, guinea pigs. And so after doing all of that, the process was after leaving hospital, I was going to be going back for checkups every three
Mm-hmm.
months initially. After I graduated to twice a year, every 6 months. And then the last year or two, I was going to do once a year. And that was going to go on for a total of 5 years.
Okay.
So by the time I do the last test, by the fifth year, and there's still no
Mm-hmm.
sign, then I'm officially declared healed.
Ah, I see.
So that was a process.
Okay. Wow.
So I went through that while I was in Germany after hospital. I left hospital end of 92. I left Germany finally 94 and then came back 98. So at the end of the day, I was declared healed on the sixth year after leaving hospital.
Wow.
When I traveled back to Germany, I was based in Douala, Cameroon at the time, and I traveled back to Germany specifically to do that last final check.
Wow. 6 years later, after leaving the hospital, right?
Yes, exactly. I left hospital 92 and I went back to Germany 98 for that final test.
Amazing. What a story.
Yeah.
And I mean, this show, and I'm so glad you mentioned that last part, because the show is called Molo Molo, Molo Molo, slowly, slowly. And
That's it.
and that resonates so much, because oftentimes we want things to happen quickly. We want to move forward. We want to move away from the pain. We want to move on
Yeah.
to better things. And we
Yeah.
forget that.
Quote unquote better
Exactly, quote
things.
unquote, right? And we forget that things need to take their natural course.
Yeah.
um
Deep, deep
yeah,
inside. Yeah.
things need to take their natural course, and God himself works with time, not against it. and and that
Absolutely.
is
Thanks
such
for
an
sharing
amazing
that.
kind of last piece. So in terms of triumph, what how did the triumph now go from going against the grain, right? Because as someone who arrived in Germany, you obviously had a really tough experience, right? Your experience was incredibly challenging, overwhelming, but also a source of incredible encouragement to the people around you, to the churches around you. I'm sure many people knew, not only in Berlin, Munich, Paris, and potentially all the churches around knew that, this brother has just conquered such an amazing time with faith and with a supporting cast. How did that now turn from, okay, I'm in Europe now, I'm here, let me now carry on with my studies and set up a life in Germany, versus now let me go back home and let me take on this calling? How did that happen?
Hmm. Hmm. Wow, it's incredible. Just listen to you describe again the process, the triumph. As you were describing, images were coming to me. I'll never forget the day I showed up. The first time I attended
Hmm.
church, the church where the doctor attends. This was 3 months after I'd signed up to become a Christian. I'd gotten baptized, but I was still in
Mm.
hospital. So I attended my first church service 3 months later after the baptism. So all of this happened while I was in hospital. And then I'll never forget a day I walked into, I think, my first midweek service. So there's Sunday
Hmm.
service, and then there's a service on Wednesdays mostly, either Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't know what happened, but I walk into a room of Christians, and then as soon as I walk in, there was an uproar
Wow.
of joy, of celebration, of clapping, of, you know.
Wow.
So when you were describing the encouragement that my story was to the Christians, um, that happened in Berlin. It happened when we had a Freizeit, they call it, where the church in Munich and the church in Berlin, we met for a retreat
Nice.
in Frankfurt am
Okay.
Mainz. Uh, that was early 93. I met Olu for the
Oh,
first
wow.
time there.
Nice.
Olu that
Yes.
you know, exactly. And so I remember being asked to do, I think, the opening prayer at that conference, that retreat. And the doctor through whom I came to faith, um, introduced me before I went ahead to do the opening prayer. There was such an encouragement around that. I still have pictures of that
Wow.
event. And then and then back then we used to have like yearly conferences where all the Christians in the congregations across Europe, Spain, Italy, Switzerland, they all come converge in
Okay.
Paris. So twice I went to Paris, 93, 94, and that same resonance where people really get encouraged. Wow, he survived cancer. Back then they used to have a Christian magazine called Upside
Yes.
Down.
Yes.
Um, and my story was
Oh,
written,
wow.
and I think there was even a picture of me and the doctor on the Upside Down magazine that was read
Oh, wow.
worldwide.
I must
You
find that.
know,
I must find that
so when
article.
you were describing that, those images were just coming back
Amen.
to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about transiting, it was quite a journey. So life kind of stabilized after about a year after leaving hospital. When I came out, I needed a couple of months. I couldn't jump back into school. I needed a couple of months to readjust. Even the Studenten Wohnheim, those who are in charge of the students' hostels, they moved my hostel, which was far from the university campus, and they put me now in the closest hostel at walking distance from the
Wow.
university. So many of those life adjustments took place before I could resume school in the next summer semester. So I took life easy for the first couple of 3, 4 months coming out of hospital to recover, to kind of like learn to live life
Exactly.
again because I'd been locked up for
Yeah.
a year. So, um, and then I was able to resume school. But truth be told, my worldview had been transformed. Prior to cancer, I dreamt of becoming like you. I dreamt of working at NASA. Okay, I dreamt of becoming some aeronautical engineer or stuff like that. And what cancer did to me was that it connected me with human pain, human suffering, and I think if I can reframe it, if I, in hindsight, I long to become more of an engineer of human
Wow.
hearts, communicate hope where there's no hope,
Wow.
where there's despair, be there for people, because you lie in hospital and you just become like one of the numbers. Go to room this, patient number
Yeah.
this. You become a nameless
Yeah.
person, you know. And I felt like connecting with human needs, human suffering, and being there for other people, having gone through what I went through. So what happened was that 2 years down the road, I heard about a missions team that was going to leave Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, as they call it today, Abidjan, to go start a missionary work in Cameroon,
Ah.
in Douala. And so I'd been praying, and in my prayer, there were two options. Either I remain in Berlin or in Germany, complete my university studies, and the option there was build like an African
Yeah.
ministry of Africans that will be in the diaspora but make an impact back in the
Yeah.
continent. So that was one option, to build that kind of ministry. I'd been to Paris, and Paris already had something like that going on. And I thought about building something similar in Germany. So an African ministry, these are people who have finished university, they're studying, but they have God's vision for life and purpose, and they will use their influence, their affluence, whatever they have, to make a positive impact back in the continent. So that was one option. And the other option was leave everything and come back to the
Wow.
continent and be on the forefront on the missionary field. So I had those two options, and I was praying through it. There was a day I remember going to spend time with a group of brothers. We used to call it sleepovers, where we all come like on a Friday evening, have watch a movie, have some fun time, and then spend the night in a flat together. So I remember in the morning after that sleepover, one of the brothers, he's still in Berlin now. He has a doctorate in economics, Dr. Dirk Ratun. He suggested that we go on a prayer walk in one of the nice parks that was not far from where we spent the night. So we went on a walk, and we had this conversation where he was asking me, so what do you envision yourself in the next couple of years? And we had a really deep conversation. And in that conversation, I told him, in my heart of hearts, I would love to go back to Africa. But it might not be the most practical thing to
Yeah.
do. I might need to still stay, finish my education and all of that. But deep down, what my heart beat right now is to go back home and share the hope I found, share the love I found. I found so much hope, so much love through the community, through the Bible. So long story short, we walked back after the prayer, and we actually prayed about it after I shared that with him. And then we got into the same flat where we spent the night. We used to do a lot of jokes and play around and So we got back, and somebody came and rang the bell, and I thought it was one of the guys who spent the night with us. So I went to open the door, but I wanted to like frighten the guy. So I opened the door, and I was hiding behind the door, and then I waited until when he's walking through the door, and then I now came out to. And so only to do that, and you realize that I was actually doing it to the leader of the church. So I was shocked. I'm like, oh no, wait, I'm sorry, And I'd never seen him come to that particular apartment. That was the first time I saw him there. And then he now told me, by the way, Gilbert, I had a call with the leader of the church in Abidjan. Uh, they're actually planning to go start a church in Cameroon. I'd already told you about this, and I had a call with him. They are willing to have you on board right away. If you come, you'll be part of the church staff, blah, 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 blah. And then he now added to that, he said, Gilbert, don't forget that you have been saved twice, physically and spiritually. Remember that.
Wow.
So for me, this was answer to my prayer. I just prayed about it a few
Yeah.
minutes before.
Yeah.
And then this event took place.
Yeah.
And then guess what happened? I went back home, and on my answering machine, there were 3 messages. One from the guy in Abidjan, inviting me to come on the missions team. One from Mike Talifer in
Wow.
Johannesburg,
Okay.
inviting me to come on the missions team. And one from Steve Johnson, his secretary from New York, inviting me to come on the missions team. That was it.
Amen. That was obvious,
There
right?
was no confusion. There was no confusion anymore.
I mean, if
There was no
you didn't
confusion.
take the hint, then the people like, no, 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 no. He's
That was it.
not ready.
So
He's
it
not
was,
ready.
and I needed it to be that
Yeah.
clear because it was such a risky thing to do. It was such a, my family thought I lost my mind.
I was gonna ask about that. Is the transition from the decision to actually doing it?
Hmm.
What type of
Hmm.
challenges, or at least that did you get
Hmm.
from knowing that you were moving the family right forward? You had a huge hiccup.
Yeah.
Now I can only imagine my mother telling me,
Yeah.
Paulin, mais qu'est-ce que tu fais? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Huh? Tu
Yeah.
es normal ou quoi? Huh?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're telling me everybody loves God. Everybody loves God. You're not the only one who loves God. Everybody loves God. What makes
Right.
you so special? And how did you reconcile kind of those noises in your head, and of course from family who
Hmm.
loves you and wants the best for you, and
Yeah.
the uncertain journey ahead that you were going back
Yeah.
home, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, you're amazing with just painting these pictures. They just take me back. Every time you describe this, images just come to my mind. And one of the images that came to my mind was, my mom had come to be with me in hospital for 2 months. It was the tail end of my treatment. I was there from February to December. By September, when I was about to start the bone marrow transplant, she made it to Germany from
Mm.
Cameroon. And she stayed through for 2 months. She was hoping I'll be discharged before she leaves, but it didn't work out. But she was there for a good while. So the African community, especially the Cameroonian community, knew my mom. Some of them knew my mom back from home. Some of them were from the same Limbe or Victoria where I came from. And so one of them told me he was like a father figure to the younger guys that we were. He had been in Germany for many years. He was married, well established. He told me, look, I know your mom, and he meant it, and it's true. And he said, your decision to leave Germany and leave school and go back home, your mom can even die of heart attack. And I still remember thinking about that and thinking about the fact that what he's saying is not far from the truth. And so I was able to manage that. There was a day I was reading the story of Stephen, who was stoned to death. And I was reflecting, meditating, just ruminating on that. And it hit me that it took Stephen's death to convert the heart of a man like Saul, who became
Yeah.
Paul. And so my conclusion was, if that's what my going back home will do to the spread of what I discovered, I grew up going to church, but I discovered something more. This was not just head knowledge about the Bible. This I had an experience now with God. I could talk to God as if a man is talking to his friend.
Yeah.
And I had access to God. God became tangible to me. And this is what I wanted to take back home. Not just religiosity, but knowledge of God in terms of experiencing God, a living, real relationship with God. And so I told myself, if going back home, if that's the price I'm going to have to pay to be like a Stephen and be a man, I still remember thinking to myself, if I go back and only one soul is transformed or saved because of my decision, it is worth it.
Wow.
And the story of Stephen is what inspired me. So that gave me the courage to carry on.
Wow. That, I've got, I've, we, when I think about what you're saying, I think of what it means to be bold, and and what it means to be un unshakable in terms of decision. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because nowadays it's so easy to make a decision, then to retract, and then and of course the Bible does speak about you being tossed all over, right? um and the fact that you said that even if it's just one person, and of course the whole point of a mission team is to it's not one person, right? I mean, that metric is a really poor metric, but yet it does come down to one person. It does come down to me reaching out to one person, and that one person can change the world. And it's not about me, it's about God. But and I think that's an amazing statement that brings me to kind of the next question that that pops into my head, which is, so you are now home, and of course there's many years of ministry work and then staff work, right? But throughout that time, what how did you see your understanding of technology, but also your understanding of what you were exposed to when you were sick and you had fighting cancer and all the technology around you, right? I mean, you were a specimen with high tech from a medicine perspective, from an engineering perspective, right? Because medicinal engineering
Yeah,
is a whole other of the
yeah,
engineering in terms of
yeah.
machines,
Biotechnology. Yeah,
biotechnology, stem cells treatment.
yeah,
How did
yeah.
that world of tech shape your view as someone who's now trying to save people's lives from their path to a more spiritual path? How do you connect the two, in and how were you able to connect the two?
It's interesting that you asked that question. So I think in the initial stage, like I mentioned, I probably went from one extreme of
Mm-hmm.
tech to the other extreme of the human needs, and I ran with that for more than 10 years. Um, let's say close to 10 years. I think where I started making some real connections was when I was working with um, what we call campus ministry in
Mm-hmm.
Abidjan. And one of the drives as a campus minister was to get students to excel in academics. That had an impact a multi impact in their lives. It improved their relationships with their family. Their family could see that Christianity was even having a positive impact on their academics. So they were more accepting of their faith. And it had an impact on their immediate classmates. So today in Abidjan, we have, from that batch of students that I used to lead, we have university professors today. We have lawyers, we have magistrates, we have a whole lot of incredible people in society that came out of that
Wow.
bunch. I still remember the medical and the pharmacy department. The students who were members of our church and of that ministry were the ones who were excelling in the medical department. And so many of their friends would follow them to church because they wanted to understand what's their
What are you
secret.
doing? Huh?
This guy, exactly. That's right. Because these guys, they don't only excel in academics, they have incredible
Yeah.
ethics in integrity in their lives. And, so I saw the impact of that drive for academic excellence. And that ignited my love for
Mm.
academics and put me on a path where I felt the need to go back to school. I tried doing that for a while. I had obstacles on my way, which finally led to me resigning and actually going back to school to do a degree in a different field, this time in social
Yeah.
science. I did a degree in communication, public relations. Um, but with that degree, I landed my first real job in the tech industry.
Okay.
And for me, that everything came full circle at that point,
Wow.
where I ended up being a technical writer for in the telecom industry, a telecom company. They were seeking ISO certification in the telecom. They call it TL 9000. Um, and so my job was go from department to department, interview people. I especially worked with what they call the NOC, Network Operating
Okay.
Center. I spent a lot of my time there interviewing the engineers, digging into their documents, digging into their, just collecting lots of information about their
Yeah.
processes, how they go about escalating when something is going wrong, troubleshooting, this or that, and collecting lots of that information and spending a lot of time coming up with what they call process mapping, mapping the
Yeah.
processes and blah 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 blah. So this was a job that brought everything together for me because it required some level of technical understanding of how things work, but to get the information from people required people skills. I was almost like bothering them from their primary job.
Mm.
And they have to create
For you.
time to for me to interview them and collect the information I need. So I had to find a way to build good relationships, connect with people. It just demanded a lot of people skills, which is a lot of what I developed in the years
Correct.
before through
Yeah.
ministry work, through missions. I'd learned to work with people,
Nice.
to learn to engineer people
Yeah.
in a way.
Y-
And so for me, that was where those two worlds came together. And I went on to do play other roles like project management, program management, and stuff like that. Mainly a role where I work in cloud computing, where my role was mainly being the middleman between the project engineers themselves and the top management, the
Yeah.
business side. So there's a business side and there's a technical side, and I was in the middle.
Nice. Yeah.
And I bring everybody in the room when project is not working or we're lagging behind. Bring everybody in the room where decisions need to be made. We talk to the business decision makers, and where it needs to be executed. We're talking to them. So for me, it took many years, molo
Yeah.
again, for those two worlds to really come together.
Wow.
But at the beginning, it was like from one extreme to the other, and then gradually through working with students, going back to school, and finding a job in the tech space, everything just came together. And so, if I reconnect with what I experienced in hospital, each time somebody tells me I'm a doctor, I feel like bowing in front of them. I respect these people for the work, for their work ethic, for their dedication, for the years invested in studying, because I'm a product. God works through people.
Yeah.
And so God has used technology to keep me alive. Stem cell technology is incredible engineering. I mean, I resisted the typical method of getting a donor from one of my siblings because I'm the oldest in my family. My brothers were all so young. I was 20, so they were all
Mm.
younger than me. I was like, let them be innocent. Don't disturb them. So they now explained the stem cell option to me, and it was basically using my peripheral blood, which luckily was not yet affected by cancer, the blood that's flowing in my circulatory system, extracting it and pulling out what they now call stem
Mm.
cells, which is like the nursery of red blood cells that grows into the actual mature
Mm.
blood cells. So extracting that from my own blood, and then after going through intense chemotherapy where they destroy everything, they now give me those stem cells with the hope that they will regenerate and reproduce a new
Yeah.
bone marrow. I mean, I'm just trying to
I know.
summarize
I mean, you know,
in lay
I
words.
I'm a poor engineer, I only build airplanes. So when you start talking to me about these things, I'm like, Gilbert, please, take it easy, my brother. Take it.
so I'm just trying to say, look at me in hospital going through this. And the thing is, medicine operates in
Yeah.
Europe where the doctors carry along. So when I came out of hospital, if I had my way, I would have gone to study either psychology or study medicine. But because I was on a scholarship scheme, it was not easy
Yeah.
to switch. And so I'm just basically saying that tech is an amazing tool, which today I'm learning increasingly. Right now, I'm working on the use of e-learning platforms for ministry.
Nice.
So I do a lot of training of young missionaries. I was in Congo last year to train in the School of Missions there, training a young crop of missionaries. And I do quite a bit online. Next month, whole of March, every Friday, Saturday, I'm going to be training the School of Missions in West Africa, based in Abidjan. I'll be training them on a model called Christ and Culture. So if you want to take Christ to any culture, you better be a student of that culture. So, but I'll be doing that online, right?
Amazing.
And so there are many of such models that we're currently working on a pilot on one of the models where we've put all the content online on an e-learning
Mm.
platform. And a student can actually go through the entire model without having to come physically
Yeah.
to class. Videos are uploaded, connected to YouTube. It's all guided step by step. We've been working on that for the past two, three
Yeah.
months to get to a point where they can start using it come next week. So here am I. There was a time I was like almost tech phobic, but here am
You're in
I
it.
finding a way. There we go. Yeah.
And that leads me kind of the last segment, which is the journey that you're on of combining your love to engineer people's hearts to with the love of African continent and the underbelly of technology that brings it all together, right? And that is you becoming a biblical teacher, but deciding to really leverage technology by flying, by, of course, what you just mentioned regarding using online technology in terms of e-learning and so forth. How did that kind of vision come about? What made you realize that, you know what, not only do I have the love, but I'm willing to also make it something that I work on a day to day, that I want to really reach out to as many people as possible. How did that come about?
Yeah, molo molo, step by step, slowly, slowly. It's been a process. So if I pick it up from me working in the corporate world, in hindsight, that was God training me to learn to use technology. And now I have the opportunity to use it for a bigger
Mm,
purpose. Um, so what happened was I lost my job 2017 after working there for like 7 years. The meltdown, Nigeria tends to be very oil
yeah,
centric. And when the fall of the oil prices affected the currency, inflation stepped in. We're buying equipment in dollars, Cisco equipment from the US and in dollars, but our clients are paying us in naira. We just couldn't survive. And so I became redundant. And the question was, what do I do now? I had to go into some soul searching to find out what are the things that I do naturally, what are some of the skills I have that I can put together and create something on my own. So the few things I came up with my people skills. Through missionary work, I have lots of connections across the continent and beyond. And then language skills. And of course, you add to that Bible teacher and all of that. So by the time I put those three major ones together, I decided to create a service facilitation type of business. I just came back from Zimbabwe 2 weeks ago. During my trip there, I went to teach a course on the Holy Spirit and the spirit realm. I was there for 2 weeks, traveled to three different cities: Harare, Guero, Bulawayo, from the north to the south.
nice.
Um, but I was able to also meet a businessman who wants to do business in Nigeria, but needs an agent on ground to represent him. And I said, I'm going to make that easy for you. And so I've been in meetings in the past couple of days creating that. And so service facilitation is being able to combine my passion for travel and teaching, but also leveraging that in a way that, so back to what you were just saying is, here am I, if I take just the example of this trip to Zimbabwe, I've gone to my 23rd African
Amazing.
country. Zimbabwe was the 23rd country in the past 5-6 years. So that's the African aspect. I've taught lessons, and then there is the tech and business aspect where I am connecting businesses with people that can service whatever needs they have.
Mm,
So this is something that developed out of, like they say, necessity is the mother
that's
of
right.
invention, right? So it took some soul searching to look at what are the things I can offer and that I can do from
Yeah.
anywhere. And so that's how I came up with this idea. It's still a work in progress because for lots of my travels, it's been people like you, the congregation where you are in Munich. They've been an incredible blessing. My prayer is that some years down the road, I'll get to a point where it can become self-generating. But for now, I badly need the kind of support
Yeah.
I've been getting.
I mean, it's such an incredible kind of shift of events where one of the first things that come to my mind when you think about 23 countries Africa, and that's one of the things I speak about in my first episode is Africa is not one country. Africa is incredibly diverse.
54,
And
54
one of
countries.
the things that I guess you potentially can speak a bit of light into is how do you find over the years that you've traveled, of course, over the years that you've also been networking with different people, Christians all around Africa, how do you find the impact of tech into into Christianity, into the churches themselves, but also within the African context? How people, I mean, how churches, how an African church does church versus how a European does church is two completely. We know what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
It's very different,
Yep. Yep.
and
Yep.
in many aspects, and of course for many reasons. But how do you find tech, and when I mean by tech, I mean modern tech, in terms of online and so forth, and other things like digital Bibles. How do you find tech having impacted the church culture in African countries?
Hmm. Yeah. Deep question. Um, Let me tell you, I've been very impressed. I was in Angola last year. I remember telling them if I had my way, I'll borrow their media uh, ministry. I mean, I'm teaching lessons. They're recording it. They're editing it. The next moment, it's online. It's it's professional. You know, and so easy when people reach out to me. I said, "Hey, do you have a lesson I can listen to?" I just pick up the link and I send to them. But the media team has done the
Wow.
job, right? And so I'm seeing that growing. I saw that in Angola, even Zimbabwe. They have a pretty good media team where I see how, because I'm in a stage now where I'm like, wow, if we had been recording many of the lessons we used to teach in the
Yeah,
90s, in the early 2000s, there's so much that has gone
it has.
lost.
That's true.
So tech has an amazing potential. Now I have a website, I have a YouTube channel. The other day, a sister reached out to me. She said, "Look, I'm interviewing for a UN job in Burundi. I know you've been to Burundi. What can you tell me about Burundi?" I just went to my website. I dug up the blog articles I'd written, videos I'd taken, pictures I'd taken. I just forwarded the link to her.
Nice.
You know, and I was just so grateful that this was 2021. It was all recorded. It's
Yeah.
all there. I took a video near the Tanganyika, Lake Tanganyika. It's all there. I even became nostalgic just revisiting that whole
Exactly.
trip through what I'd recorded
Yeah.
myself, you know? So I think tech has an amazing potential to give us the memory that we need as a community. Imagine if the people who wrote the Bible, the Psalms, if it was not recorded, we wouldn't have a
Correct.
Bible here
Yeah.
today. So we have the opportunity to record spiritual history, religious history, journey, our generation, what God is doing in our generation. And I see incredible strides being made in many of our congregations. There was a time when, especially in 2021, 2022, I became like a bit of an educator for many of the churches I visit. When I'm going, I'll buy the lapel mic for them. I'll buy a few media
Yeah.
tools and train them how to use it and leave it with them.
Nice.
Now I'm so proud to see them doing stuff online. Some of them are now going to be joining to take some of the courses I'll be teaching online. But back then, some didn't even know how to get on Zoom. Some didn't really know how to, basic stuff. So there is really some incredible literacy, which is growing at different rates in
Yeah.
different places, but it's definitely on the rise. In terms of comparison, how church is being done, we still tend to be quite, we love our in person, right? And we kind of like have to educate ourselves to say, look, God is everywhere. If somebody really cannot make the in person service, let's still make sure that there's an online option. So in Africa, we're learning to strike that good balance because we love our in-person church. We love to
Yes,
sweat it out,
yes,
dance, sweat.
yes.
We love that. That connection. It's cultural.
Yeah.
You know, but I don't know if I've really addressed your question fully, but those are a few thoughts I'd like to
And I
share.
guess maybe it's more like, do you find any specific differences between North Africa versus, or East versus West, maybe, or Central versus South? Is there any specific things that jump out of your mind in terms of how tech is impacting either more or less, or is it really much the same in terms of impact? What would you say?
No, what I think is that tech has really, for everybody. I mean, before this session, I was in a class. I'm doing a class on spiritual formation, and the professor, the person who was teaching the class, was telling me that the pandemic transformed the world. So it has made knowledge, information so available, and so that is definitely impacting Africa, and globally, it's impacting the world. What I think will be differences are differences that were there already in terms of how we actually
Mm.
use it. Okay? And the actual use of tech, culture comes into play. We know that the Western cultures are very, we call it monochronic, very time conscious. And, and so in our use of technology, uh, we see that there is a lot of emphasis on make sure the lesson lasts this amount of time. Don't go beyond this amount of time. These are things that were there before.
Yeah.
Okay, um, so we still have those cultural undertones, but in terms of the actual use of technology, I dare say that I believe tech is really helping to bridge the gaps. I'll take, for example, one of my main passions is bridging the gap between English and the other parts of Africa, like the French speaking part of Africa, even the Portuguese, like Angola, Mozambique. They are often lagging behind.
I see.
So a lot of changes happen in English, and the world is moving way ahead, and they are way behind just because of the
Yeah.
language. So there's a huge potential. So now I make sure when I write my blog articles, there's a French
Yeah.
edition of it
Yeah.
to make sure that people are immediately carried along in the other
Yeah.
language. You know, so I see a huge opportunity to use tech to fill in so many of those
Yeah.
gaps. Yeah.
Wow. That's that's really very insightful. Now, maybe the other way around, when I think of tech, what would you say is some of the possible dangers that that tech brings to the modern day Christian? So, what do I mean by that? What are the possible caveats that someone who has embraced tech, and when I mean by tech, I don't just mean the visuals, I don't mean the audio, but also embraced, this is my own view, right, where note taking at church, or taking notes, or actually following along a particular sermon, or potentially an online sermon, you not being fully present. What are what are some of the dangers you? This is what I've seen, but what are some of the dangers you potentially have already started seeing as a biblical teacher, of course, but just also as an observer who's visiting all these places, that can be attributed to the rise in use of technology? Is this something that you can already correlate, or?
Mm. Yeah. Great question. Really great question. So I'm afraid my question, my answer to your question might be
Mm-hmm.
subjective based on the way I view the use of tech. There are people who, like I said, feel like attending a service online is less spiritual than attending in person. I don't subscribe to that because John 4:24 says God is spirit, and those who worship him in spirit
Yeah.
and in truth. So I can't limit my worship of God to a location. Rather, what I need to grow in is making sure that my awareness, my mindfulness is present, irrespective of whether I'm in a church building or I'm sitting behind my
Mm.
computer. So that's why I say it might be subjective, but that's where I am coming from. Because tech is here to stay. So rather than fight tech, can we learn how to use it and ride it? That's what the apostles did in the first
Yeah.
century. God worked it out that the gospel came up during the Roman Empire when road networks were very good. That's
Yeah.
technology. And Paul leveraged those technologies really well with not only traveling by road, by sea, that's technology
Yeah.
of that time. The Roman postal system was excellent. That's how most of those letters were sent, um, you know, through messaging, through messengers and the postal system. So I only try to imagine what if Paul had what you and I have today? What will Paul do with it? How will he
Yeah.
leverage it? He will not resist it. He will talk about the dangers, yes. He will talk about watching out for distractions, but he will
Mm.
maximize it. So, in terms of, instead of talking of the dangers of tech, I'll rather talk about the, the spiritual education that needs to accompany the use of
Good
tech
point.
so that tech is used and leveraged
Hand in hand,
positively,
right?
just like tech was leveraged and used to give me a chance to live after cancer.
Nice. Nice. And that's, I think that's a very good point where I think one thing that is quite important is to have it hand in hand. Is how do we increase our use of tech within the African churches and the church culture by also increasing
Yeah,
our level of education on mindfulness and what it means to be a mindful Christian. If I can summarize what you were saying, basically really
that's
bringing both of those
beautifully
up,
so
right?
summarized.
That's a very good
That
point. That's a
that's
very,
beautiful.
very good point.
Yeah,
Very good point. And I think that's,
that's my approach. There was a time I also tended to fight tech. I was one of the slow guys to get a mobile
mm,
phone because I found it very invasive.
yeah,
I'm one of those guys who love to just disappear and go into the mountains or into the quiet and spend solitude time with God and not be
yeah,
distracted. I developed that culture early as a Christian. And I found it invasive that while I'm doing that, somebody can just reach out to me because I have a phone. So there was a time when everybody on the church staff in Abidjan had a mobile phone except Gilbert. So I was a slow
yeah,
adopter. But I think it helped me so that by the time I decided to key in, I prepared myself and developed some attitudes to prevent it from being a distraction.
yeah,
And I still need to continue to work on that. But like you said, rather than look at it as a distraction, can we look at it as something that we can work with side by side? Channel it in a way that is
yeah,
positive. I think that's what we're doing
yeah.
right now. I would right now I would need about 2,000 euros to meet up with you like we did a few months ago and have this conversation face to face.
Amen. That's it.
And here we are leveraging tech.
That's it. Um, Now we never really touched on kind of family in a way. In terms of course, we've spoken about all the various accolades and also the amazing journey. How has the journey been for you as becoming a husband, becoming a father? How have you found that journey compared to compared to all the other mountains you had to climb? What would you say those journeys have been like?
Beautifully put. You've put it so beautifully. Um, when I met my wife in a retreat of singles who came from across countries in West and Central Africa. I was coming from Cameroon. She was coming from Nigeria. We met in Ghana. The retreat was taking place in Ghana. When I met her, we built a friendship long distance after we met. I was in Cameroon, she was in Nigeria. And then I came to the conviction that I've met the woman of my life. As soon as I was wrapped up the degree course I was doing, I packed my bags and literally crossed the Atlantic Ocean to come to Nigeria. I didn't fly. I crossed the sea from Limbe
Are you
to here
serious?
because I
Wow.
found a treasure worth the danger.
Is that the story you told your wife?
I've told her in different forms. This is one of
For you across the ocean,
yeah,
my love.
absolutely, absolutely. So she was absolutely worth it. She is, and we've been married. In April will be our 13th year. 12 or 13, 12,
Hmm.
yeah, 2012 we got married. I'd been around for 20 years in the church as a single. She had been around for even
Wow.
longer. Faithful woman of God. So I feel like God has given me some restful years. After the climbing of those
Yes.
mountains, God has shown me some really kind moments and experiences in my marriage, in a woman who loves me unconditionally, who totally, yeah, bears with me, accepts me, allows me to be me, uh, and is a great relationship. She gave me a Valentine card yesterday. Let me show you the
Yeah.
card quickly. I absolutely love this particular one. There were two that she gave me.
Nice.
Um, and this one says, "My favorite love story is ours."
Nice. Very cool.
And a beautiful write up. Valentine's supposed to be the one day of the year set aside to tell you how much you filled my life with love, meaning, and special memories, and how being with you has changed everything for the better. But how am I supposed to fit all the wonderful feelings I have for you into only one day? For you, an amazing husband who fills my heart with warmth, friendship, and confidence. And I'm thankful for you every single day. So I just felt like this really summarized our story. And, uh, and God decided to crown that with an amazing son. For 7 years, we didn't have any kids. And then God blessed us with Joseph. He's now 5.
Nice.
And smart, lovely, kind, and very ambitious young man. Very driven,
Yeah, no,
you know.
it's
So
amazing to hear that.
yeah.
It's really, really, really good to hear that God is a God who works through the good and through the tough, and oftentimes we must just hold on for the ride, right?
Amen.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
And
Beautifully said.
I'm sure we will definitely have another podcast on Christian marriage with tech. I definitely think it's a topic worth having, on the
Mm.
influence, but also how we can leverage it to indeed
Mm.
have
Mm.
better and healthier families across our African communities. But if I were to kind of summarize, or at least allow you to give kind of a summary for yourself in terms of your current journey, in terms of vision for Africa, vision for yourself, but vision for the work that you're doing. What comes to mind when it comes to what would you like to achieve through, of course, the tech being an underbelly of all things, but what is it that you're hoping to see in the next few years?
Thanks for sharing that. In fact, in my previous call, I mentioned the class I was attending. The professor, we're supposed to be many students online, but I was the only guy who signed up. So I ended up having some very personal time with him. And he was very, I dare say, even prophetic. And just, he was like, Gilbert, I believe you've had an incredible life. I believe if you died today, God will be saying, well done, good and faithful servant, for all you've done. But I really believe the bigger part of your work and your calling lies ahead. They were very deep words. And I believe that. I believe everything he was saying. God granting life. I believe my work going forward, interestingly, is going to be a lot more with people within Christianity in our churches than outside, with the goal of growing to attain maturity, Christian maturity, the fullness of Christ. These are all scriptures you'll find in Ephesians, in Colossians. Christ in you, the hope of glory. Being transformed into the image from one glory to another. Being conformed to the image of his Son. There's a lot of growing to do internally,
Yeah.
so that Christ is reflected. And I see myself as prayerfully maybe an African pioneer in that space. It's something that we've not emphasized a lot in our previous 3 decades. We've emphasized going to the nations, making
Yeah.
disciples, but we've not emphasized internal growth.
Yeah.
And so that's a space I want to really continue to grow personally in. I'm in the journey myself and invite others on that journey. So that's personal, that's church wide. And if we extend it to tech and professional life, is I dream of Christian evangelists at their job sites
Amen.
who don't need to tell people that they are Christians, who don't need to invite them to a Bible talk or a Bible event. Their lives will be the Bible that their colleagues will be reading. And they'll be the ones asking their colleagues, why are you so different? Their colleagues will be the ones asking them,
Yeah.
why are you
Yeah.
so different? And they will have the opportunity to share what makes them the way they are. But that's going to be a growth from the inside out. I would like to dedicate the next decade or more working on that path.
Yeah. I think that's a very, very, that resonates a lot with me, to be honest. And and that's essentially, in a way, what this show is trying to do, which is to try to awaken the minds on that there is a certain bar. There is a certain bar that we all have to strive towards, irrespective of your background, irrespective of your ethnicity, irrespective of where you stay, irrespective of what you study, irrespective of what you work. There is a
Mhm.
bar. The bar is all around us. God has given us so many examples of heroes that had incredible qualities like yourself, that we can all inspire to, and ask the fundamental question: how do I become like them? What are some of the qualities that I can gain from them? And who is that source of those qualities? that can sustain it and that can grow it and that can help my family be it. Um, and thank you so much, Gilbert, for today. It's been such an amazing interview and conversation with you. We've laughed, we've had teary eyes.
You've made it so
Oh
rich.
man,
Thank you.
I am so grateful for you just taking the time from your family to be able to spend time with me. Again, always a pleasure to be able to speak with you. It is truly exciting to see what's happening. I mean, I'll go on your website at least once a month. I'm on your website to see what's going on. What are you doing? What is the blog about? Where was he again? No wonder he's not answering my messages. He's traveling. And but I am so excited, and I'm really hoping to really continuously see the progress you're making with all the different people that you're working with. Of course, we are in different groups together, right? So it's really exciting to do this journey with you. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, this is Molo Molo African Tech Stories, a podcast where we
Thank you.
share.
Thanks for having me,
And
man.
but thank you, Gilbert. I don't know. You must also say thank you to your wife for really allowing us to have this time, right? I mean, it's past almost 10 o'clock, so I'm really grateful for you making the time. And there you have it, an amazing interview with my friend Gilbert Kimeng, an incredible visionary for the African continent who has managed to overcome such an amazing story of pain, of discomfort, and find his purpose that is currently impacting so many people in so many African countries. Thank you so much for watching. This is Molo Molo African Tech Stories, the podcast where we share and discover the incredible stories of African tech champions and innovators that are shaping the African continent. I am Polan Kantwe. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe as we will be having more guests to the show, but more importantly, ensure that you are able to catch the next episodes that will be coming up. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Ciao.